And in some ways that does require, I think, a global approach, certainly among like-minded democracies, to take this issue seriously. Now, the G7 summit that was held in Canada began to try to develop some norms. Dick, you might want to talk a bit about that, around promoting greater cooperation. Our intelligence agencies and the Five Eyes obviously cooperate on this. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, there are some things that you can do. One is to do a better job of calling out the perpetrators. And by that, I mean external perpetrators, right? So when there's compelling evidence that the Russians are launching a major disinformation campaign, we should publicly, and our government should publicly call them out. And we do have a mechanism, actually, through that was set up recently. Obviously, it's not going to be the Prime Minister in an election campaign, but there is a senior group of civil servants who certainly would be in a position to be able to do that. The other thing I think we could do is to be more effective in using some of the new technologies, and there's some Canadian firms that have the artificial intelligence capability in more or less real time to be able to see disinformation campaigns and where they're coming from across open social media, Twitter, for example. And I think it would be great if we had a site, a curated site, not run by the government, but obviously supported by you know, multi-stakeholder sources of funding, so that you could actually go and see on any given issue what's happening. Because you can actually track this stuff. You don't have to do it backwards now, you can actually do it more or less in real time. So there are ways to sensitize the public in terms of what's happening and who's doing it.
I agree with that, but one of my hobby horses in dealing with these issues is that we sometimes forget about the context. Now, I agree with Fen that if we have a clear, unambiguous case of country X mucking about in our elections, we should say something. But, you know, if I were in my last job, I wasn't only director of CSIS, I did other things. I was the National Security Advisor, and I was being asked to advise the Prime Minister. We have an example of China, which is more important for us, doing this. And I know that we're desperate for more trade, more investment, more tourism with China. It affects thousands of jobs. It complicates a whole raft of relationships. It doesn't matter what I really think. If you're a minister of the Crown or the Prime Minister, you've got to think about all these things. So I think we should do that, speaking as a citizen. I don't know what I would have advised the Prime Minister if I had been asked. Because you've got to look at these things in a broader context, which is why I think Fen is absolutely right. Canada, qua Canada, ain't going to make a lot of progress on this alone. We need to find a way to work, I'd say primarily with our NATO allies to start with, but even more broadly, we are not going to be effective in dealing with this broadly by doing it alone. It is simply not going to happen.
So both of you guys touched on some of the new measures that are in place ahead of this election. You talked about the panel, which is active now.